Hello guys, David Vokes here. Oh buddy, it's a beautiful day here in Oklahoma. Well, it's a sunny and hot and pretty typical summer day here in Oklahoma. Hope you're having a wonderful day where you are. Hey friends, have you ever, you know, most of my subscribers are here in the United States. I mean, some of them are in Australia and Canada and England and so forth, but um, not so many of my subscribers are actually in South America or Peru, although there are a few. But so we wouldn't know. Most of my subscribers probably wouldn't know firsthand. Maybe they hadn't been there. A few of you have visited the area around Peru, in southern Peru, and you've probably, but if not, you've probably seen on the internet or pictures of all of these great big temples. But we're not that familiar with it. We just think, well, there's some rocks strewn around down there in Peru. We've seen a lot of big temples in pictures, and I think we kind of get the idea that there's 3 or 4, 5 or 6 of them, and they're an enigma, and yeah, we get that. But it's kind of like Egypt, down through, clear on down the Nile, and all the way down past Egypt into Sudan, Ethiopia. This is hundreds of miles. There are literally, I don't know, maybe hundreds, if not, I don't know how many hundreds of these huge edifices. And if you think, well, it's far more than that in South America, because this goes all the way down through Mexico. It goes all the way down through Peru and Chile, and all the way down. Goodness knows, that's just some of the ones that they're digging up, see? Because the ones that are down there in Brazil, in Peru and stuff like that, they were overgrown. They didn't even know they were there. Many of the ones in the Brazilian rainforest, they had no idea what was under the jungle. They're just discovering many, many, many of these huge, gigantic cities. They're claiming now there's probably, I don't know, like 100 million people in this heyday of their civilization. They're guessing. But this was a vast, vast civilization that rivaled, I think, you have to be careful when you say it rivaled Europe or something, because it was 2 different day and ages. Europe never was anything like Egypt or South America, except in modern times with these big glass buildings. But, in medieval times, there was, some castles, and that was pretty amazing. Some pretty big stones that you find these castles all over. And in a sense, I don't know why we don't think of that as, like, why do we marvel at this huge pyramid? But over here's a castle with huge stones, and we think, well, that's just a castle. Okay, I get that some of the castles are only maybe 100 feet high or something, and these pyramids are more than 200, 300, 400 feet high in some cases, but not that many. I mean, there's a few temples, like the one in, the Great Temple of Khufu, and down there, the 3 big temples down there in Cairo, the biggest one is 490 feet tall, and that's very, very tall. But not too many of the Great Pyramids are that tall, but they're a very big building. But in various places around the world, there are buildings. I mean, regardless of whether the building is huge or anything, they're enigmas. At Baalbek, we've got big stones that are still just sitting there as though they hadn't been, they got quarried, but they hadn't been drugged to wherever they were going to take them, is what it kind of appears to be like, although there was definitely in ancient history a huge temple at Baalbek in Syria. And, it was an amazing archaeological find, because these stones weigh, I don't know how many tons. I didn't go and look before I did this video, but it's hundreds of tons. The buildings from the pictures that I see look to be as big as a house, longer, like a long, double wide. That's kind of the idea I get when I see the pictures. I didn't go and see them myself, but that's pretty big with solid stone that was hewn right out of the rock. These things are an enigma. We cannot really comprehend how they move them. We've got theories. People have talked about theories. But when you start thinking about all the odd things that we can't explain and what they all appear to be telling us, for instance, the vast number of temples and pyramids and buildings that we're finding throughout Mexico and down through South America, they seem to be held together with roads. Many of them have roads going from one city to the other. This was very, very civilized. You know, a bunch of idiots aren't running around building huge edifices of stone, hundreds of feet high in the desert or in the jungle. They had scientific advancements. I mean, roads for one, plumbing. There is all kinds of theories about what they did. There's certainly writings. They had calendars. And by the way, there is talk of a possibility that the Mayan calendar wasn't 2012, but it was actually 2021, that they were talking about the end of the age. Which is interesting because of a particular friend of mine who is a kind of a Native American enigma in these latter days. He seems to be almost inspired by some prophetic wind that's blowing through, but he's going around from South America through Mexico all the way up into Canada, and even around the world he's gaining support. And many of the ancient indigenous peoples are beginning to understand that something has to be done. The prophecies need to be fulfilled. And they're listening to this man. And they're getting together. And they're talking about taking back our world. And so this man has connections with many native peoples around the world, especially there in Mexico and Canada and here in the United States. And so there's something prophetic happening here. You know, when we started digging up pyramids in Ethiopia, and, you know, so much of what's going on, they're just not keeping us abreast. Like when they dug up the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then somebody comes along later and says, oh, they're fake. And then that's all everybody believes is, oh, they were fake. No, they only found a couple of fragments that somebody tried to fake. The rest of the Dead Sea Scrolls are real, okay? And so these great pyramids have hieroglyphs on the temple walls. It's not fake, okay? Nobody went down there with a chisel in the last couple of years. But there are lots of people trying to make you believe that many of these things that they're finding are just fake, or they're not really as amazing as they look. It was probably just some indigenous peoples out there with Tootsie skirts who were going, how, wow, 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 you know, around in a circle with a fire going and feathers in their hat. And they just sort of, maybe it was the devil, you know, who did it for them, and they worshiped the devil and stuff like this. Well, they certainly did have ancient guidance from the stars, those that we call the gods. But they did that in Egypt, and they did it in Babylon, and all over the world. And even today, there is some connection to the stars with our governments, as we talked about there at the Capitol in Washington, D.C., where they originally called that city Alexandria. It's still called Alexandria today, actually. If you look just beneath where it says on the map, Washington, D.C., look beneath it, it says Alexandria. That's the name of the city, actually. And that was the name of the ancient megaplex, the great city of Ra. And then the Greeks named it Heliopolis, Helios being the sun, Opolis being city. And when the Greeks came down there and took over that area, the priests that were there knew that there was going to be a changing of the guard, and there was going to be government. The world empire was changing from the pharaohs, and it was going to be transferred to the Ptolemies and then to the Caesars. And from there, it would go two different ways. The true kingdom would lie in the hands of the great Christ, who was destined by prophecy to come to the earth and die for the sins of the world. But there is another branch that Ezekiel chapter 17 mentions that was taken to Babylon. And that branch of the royal priesthood was taken from there all the way to the Holy Roman Empire and stays there to this day in the royal bloodlines in Europe. And so these ancient temples all taught this esoteric wisdom. So as we said the other day, when we were talking about the Capitol building there in the United States, that is not just a building, and that's not just a government, that's a religion, because all the ancient laws were handed down by the gods. And of course, this God, Yahweh, in the Old Testament, was a very, very vengeful God who said his name was jealous. And he put mankind under slavery and said they could not have knowledge to become like God, and kicked them out of the garden and cursed them. When Christ came, he said, your father's the devil, and he's a liar and a murderer, and you shouldn't be listening to him. He's a deceiver. Get thee behind me. Now come and follow me, and I will show you the way of love. I will show you the Father. Okay, and I'm going to give you a new covenant. I'm going to purchase you from Yahweh, and I'm going to redeem you and set you free, and I'm going to love you, and I'm not going to allow any condemnation to come upon you. There is no condemnation in those who follow me. Okay, Moses brought the law, but I bring the truth. And my Father is light, and there is no darkness at all in him. He doesn't have any wrath, and he loves you. And you can go right straight to him, and you don't need a priesthood. He's not mad at you. Okay? You can go straight with boldness to his throne and ask him whatever you wish, for the Father loves you. And this is the new covenant, that you love one another. So the world history is based on this entire prophetic information written down in either hieroglyphs or cuneiform or whatever, that's played out amongst the nations, that rises up kings, and every generation wonders if this will be the day, or this will be the decade, or this will be the moment that the great Christ will come and establish his kingdom with righteousness upon the earth. But when we get to looking at these ancient buildings, I think secular individuals in our world have been trying to downplay any divine information that we might have gotten, any spiritual truths that we had learned, or esoteric wisdom that we had been learning in the past. You see, from the very beginning, Yahweh didn't want anyone to have knowledge. Okay, there were those who were trying to give mankind knowledge. Our Father in heaven, who sent his prophets and the apostles and Jesus, once and for all, who revealed this great, amazing mystery to the children of men. But it was the devil who does the opposite, who lies and hides and won't let you know that, these truths, this knowledge, so that you can become like God. So they keep this ancient wisdom secret, hidden. They want you to believe that they're God and you're not, and you need to depend upon them for everything and be their slave. But in modern times, mankind is puzzled because we don't know what to believe. We don't know if there is such a thing as God. We don't know if we're going to live forever. We don't know what the governments are up to. We were told we had freedom, and now it seems like we have none. And we just don't know what's about to happen. Is the Bible true? Is the Antichrist here? Is this the end of the world? So while the church has been trying to kind of hide all of this archaeological stuff, right? They didn't even want you to know the Dead Sea Scrolls were there for a long time, or any of the cuneiform. It's like 100 years in the making. It was 1945 that they came out with they found the Nag Hammadi Library, which gave us the original teachings of Jesus and showed us that Christianity, early Christianity, was linked to the Hermetic teachings and the Gnostic Neoplatonic schools, the mystery schools that goes back to Egypt. But they didn't want us to find that out, and even now, lots of people are trying to deny it. You don't see that much about all the new discoveries. Again, if you were to think about pyramids in Egypt, all you'd probably ever think about is maybe that Great Pyramid that, Khufu or something like that. But, not too many people realize the vastness of these temples. And very few people understand what they're now discovering in Peru. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because we've got several witnesses that tell us, and it's hard to conclude any other conclusion than what we now know from the ancient scriptures themselves, that the gods themselves, who could literally do these kinds of great miracles, they had ships that came from the sky, and they could do these magical things, and they were very powerful beings. So these ancient books tell us these things, but the scholars say, well, it's just stories and it's not true. Or the gods are just mythological notions, stories, poetry. It's not real. But you see, this is far more intricate than just some poetry. And now, when we look at the evidence of archaeology, it is almost, in my opinion, it's impossible to not see that the ancient esoteric wisdom, such as the Bible, the Book of Thoth, and the hieroglyphs on the pyramids, and the cuneiform that we've recently found, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and all the other things that we found, all of it clearly indicates some highly advanced beings lived in ancient times and did things. I mean, we look at these temples now, and even if you can notice how big the rocks are, and you might think to yourself, wow, that's pretty big. I don't even know how we could do that today. Like, it's so heavy. We don't have cranes that can lift these rocks. But, and you probably heard about how if you can't, number one, you can't lift the rocks and put them up there like that. Number two, the rocks seem to be carved into blocks that are so straight. They're chiseled out so perfectly square that they fit together, and you can't get a little piece of paper in between the cracks. It's absolutely square. The Great Pyramid, which has been there, many say, 10,000 years, covers an area of 13 acres at the base. And from one end of the 13 acres to the other end, it's not off of level at all. It's absolutely perfectly level. It has never leveled or shifted in all these thousands of years. So that tells us not only that they were able to get this huge structure that must weigh thousands of tons, they got it to rest in such a way that it wouldn't shift. But not only that, they made it square and level, and they knew astronomy better than we did because they aligned it with the stars, and they knew about stars up there that we can't see with a telescope, or unless you have a telescope. So now, unless they had glass that they could, make lenses with, which many people say, well, they didn't have telescopes back then. They didn't have spectacles or glass. Well, maybe they did. Think about the fact that glass is just made out of sand, and glass will break over time. Any kind of an earthquake or a storm could knock buildings over, or just the fact that over time the ground builds up and the ancient civilizations are below the earth and the glass gets broken. If there were glass, we wouldn't even know it. See, what we don't understand is that most of the civilization will be preserved after 1,000 or 2,000 years if it's rock, right? Maybe. But the rock is going to wear to such an extent that it's not going to look like it was originally, obviously. Much of what we're seeing is just the foundational parts. I mean, the overlay, the gold, the silver, the fine jewels, the lapis lazuli, and all that was taken in raids by Alexander the Great and other military exploits. Even as late as Napoleon Bonaparte, he was going down there to Egypt and ripping off precious stones and precious jewels and gold and so forth. Herodotus tells us about the cities and the beautiful fountains and all that they were doing. And so we also have to understand that these rocks might have only been just the foundation of these vast civilizations of these cities. They may have built wooden or cement apartments or skyscrapers or other edifices on top that have since deteriorated. If they were made out of wood, they certainly would have just eventually been ransacked and destroyed, and the wind and the hail and the dust, and over the time they just wear away and they're gone. Floods come through, and so we don't have access to anything except for the literal foundations of these civilizations. And underneath these great huge temples there appears to be passageways. Herodotus tells us about the passageways that go underneath the Great Pyramid and all throughout Egypt and up through Syria and all around the world, basically, he implies. And here we have now proof that there are tunnels, passageways, that going down through these temples down in under the ground. And that is what I want to show you, because what's under there was meant to be kept secret. I believe that there is all of the ancient wisdom has been reserved and stored for the latter days. We've been talking about the fact that the Bible says that we're going to have a restoration of all things, spoken of by the mouth of the prophets and his holy apostles. And everything must be restored. And Elijah must come to turn the hearts of the fathers back towards their sons and the hearts of sons to their fathers, that he might not bring the whole earth to an end because of this curse that will go forth upon the earth if we don't get our hearts right. So Jesus talked about preaching to the lost tribes and gathering them. Other sheep that I have that are not of this fold, them too I shall bring. All of the Old Testament is a prophecy about the gathering of Israel, the regathering of Israel. And of course, this is what the final finale there in the book of Revelation, when you see this great multitude which no man could number. And this is what causes the Apostle John to exclaim, "Oh my, who are these, my Lord? Why, wow, this is a mystery. Oh my goodness, explain this one. I didn't understand it. You were loving, that you were going to save mankind. This great multitude, this promise, right? The woman's seed, and that seed being not many, but one, which is Christ. And we are all in Christ from the founding of the world. This is the great mystery. The seed of the woman, the first prophecy in Genesis 3:15. But take a good look at this, the remains, the skeletal remains of a vast civilization in Peru. If you're looking at that picture there, right there on the screen, you'll probably imagine that could be a big auditorium where people came and sat down. There's obviously room here for thousands of people. Now, everybody knows, I mean, if you go to, say, Houston or New York or some big city, the stadium might hold 100,000 people or so. But the city may be millions, because not everybody goes out personally to the stadium, because they hold these games and this entertainment, the Coliseum and all of this stuff that they would do. They held these things all the time. They brought the people together. So, in my opinion, when you look at this, it seems to be almost identical in every way to our civilization today. Big buildings where the elite are, the doctors and the lawyers are up there in their penthouse or above the courthouse, or or whatever in the big buildings downtown, the bankers and so forth, and they seem to be doing stuff that the rest of us peasants don't really know what's going on. But they finance and organize these big events, and they want us to come and participate and watch. They want to sort of teach us some sort of propaganda and keep us content and give us these games to play. Because we were the workers. Somebody had to build all this. It doesn't matter whether it's now or then. Yeah, they had to have slaves here. But there must have been something more than just the fact they had a lot of slaves. Because they had to know, there had to be some knowledge, architectural knowledge. But the stuff that they put and engraved in the walls, words that to this day we don't really fully understand. They seem to be prophecies. It's like in the Bible. And yet the whole world knows that there's something very special to these words. It's like somebody wrote this and they meant it. And they're not just, somebody came up with some weird idea and we don't know if it's true. No, this is really much bigger than that. These people have been around for thousands of years in every culture, in every nation, been saying the same thing in their esoteric holy books, warning us of the dangers about the latter days and and God's wrath, and we've got to work and do His will or we're all going to hell. These rocks aren't just big. This is unfathomable. The lengths that they went to build these temples, to preserve this knowledge in stone. But as I said, Herodotus says that underneath the Egyptian pyramids underneath Heliopolis was this great labyrinth. He called it the labyrinth, and it was full of the priests' books, the scrolls, and all the ancient wisdom was down there. Well, when the Ptolemies went down, they couldn't really find it. They never found it. Just like when Coronado came to South America and to Mexico and up through America. Ended up in Kansas, where his last stop was, interestingly enough. But along the path that he took, all those people, when he finished his little exploration, whatever, to go back and give word to the king and queen, Ferdinand and Isabella, and he's like looking for these 7 cities of gold, because he heard they had all this gold and all this advanced, these great cities, the 7 cities of amazing, technology and wealth, but they never found it. Because you see, by the time that any of these yokers ever got off their boats, these ancient ones got word. They were very faithful priests. And they knew that they were the watchers. They were keepers of the Holy Grail, shall we say. And in every case, they were faithful, and they took and closed off the entrances to these great labyrinths and their underground passages where the real city was, where the real amazing stuff was, the great wealth of the gods. And they're not only in silver and gold and minerals, but also in knowledge. And they knew that these individuals that were conquering the world by weapons of war, they were not using these metals for decoration and for what they're made for. Maybe they were made to plate your toilet seat, right? Why not? That's a good thing to use it for. But to hoard it and to claim you're better than other people and use it to, torture and abuse the civilization. No, that's not what it should be used for. Gold is a resource that we can use. You know, it's hard, so you can melt it down and make tools out of metals. You can use these tools for something. You can advance in learning and knowledge, but they use them for war. You see, you can always use everything for good and bad. And the world, these individuals that came into Egypt and took over Heliopolis and razed it to the ground, they weren't worthy of this knowledge. So the priests took that knowledge underground, just like they did in Peru. They took it underground and closed off those passageways. Now, today, if the military, our military, has any knowledge of what's down under these tunnels, they're either hiding it from us still, or our Father in heaven won't let them find it, you know, because the keeper of the grail is watching over it and has fooled them. I don't know. But it seems a little odd, because we've definitely found things that, number one, the world doesn't seem to really take seriously, and number two, we're not studying this information or letting people know what it really means. But there's no doubt, when you take a look at this civilization that's still standing, basically, like I said, the skeletal remains of all of this huge, vast civilization. There must have been gardens and flowers all around, and like I said, all the gold plating and silver plating, you know, and the lapis lazuli, all that precious stuff has been looted, whether it was in South America or Egypt or anywhere else, or China or India. All these pyramids and all these temples were looted. Yeah, there's a lot of greed in this world. So those righteous and the keepers of the Holy Grail couldn't trust mankind with this information. They would have looted it, busted it, spit on it, profaned it, and they would have ruined it, lost it, or made it into a urinal. You know what I mean? Mankind has no respect for the truth. And if they ever find anything true or enlightening, they'll hide it from you, because they don't want mankind enlightened. They want to keep us slaves. So they don't want us to remember our ancient past, where we were working together and building vast civilizations, that they came over. Look, I just found out the other day, this guy was talking about that's doing these, he's getting people together from all the way to South America to Canada and around the world. But, and this is the first time I've heard of this. I mean, I knew about the Popol Vuh. There was a guy who'd gone down there after, you know, Cordova and Columbus and everything like that, I guess, or I don't know exactly what year he went there. And he got together with the medicine men, the shamans there that remained. And he says, I want you guys to tell me everything that you know about your history. We're going to write it down. I want, you know, because there were a lot of oral stories that was handed down, and they tried to put all this ancient wisdom in books. Well, it was called the Popol Vuh, and that's basically what I thought was pretty much all we knew of their ancient ways and civilization. But what I am hearing is that when the colonizers and the inquisitors and all these explorers would go throughout the world, they went, you know, for the Catholic Church, and they had on their boats, they would have scribes, and they wrote everything down. They chronicled and cataloged everything they did, how they murdered and pillaged and raped the indigenous peoples wherever they went. It's all been written down. They don't want you to know about it. They don't want it to come out into the light. They don't want to translate all this stuff into English, but they wrote down all the terrible, wicked, evil things they did to the native peoples, and it's documented. See? And this is going to be coming out, because this guy I told you, that I'm telling you about, is going around to all the elders, and they're going to get together, and they're going to expose all of this. They're going to publish this information. So he's been given privy and some knowledge about these codices that are turning up. And in this is a lot of information about their ancient ways and things that they believed in Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan and all of the teachings that they had. But one thing is very clear. Whatever was going on down there in Peru was not something that a bunch of slaves in Tootsie skirts was running around carrying out. These aren't a bunch of savages that built the civilization. If you look on the picture below, you'll see this huge, I don't know if you realize what you're looking at there, but you're thousands of feet in the air looking down. Now, people who don't have aircraft would have no need to build or put lines like that on the ground. These are called the lines that are at Nazca. Nazca is a place in Peru. It's not but just a couple of miles from the great temples that we're talking about. And also that one called CUSCO, where they found these crystal skulls, which I want to talk to you about, and show you, literally show you the discovery, part of the discovery. And when you see it, it will be undeniable to your eyes that something's going on here that they don't want you to know. And it's very, very big. So, if these people, these ancient ones, could build these temples all around the world, remember, this is showing that they had a one world government, right? Because whatever they were doing in Babylon or China or India, they were also doing in Egypt and in Mexico and Peru. Now, they had the same teachings. Well, you say they had boats, Dave. Of course they had the same teachings. But why did every nation set their kingdoms up the same way, same priesthoods, the same beliefs, same temples? They're all like pyramids. Well, because it was a holy architecture. And a pyramid is part of this, where it has to do with, we'll get into this one of these days. I'm going to be looking into this a little bit more, but it appears that the pyramid shape itself may have something to do with something very dynamic. And it may have to do with literally making you weightless, or more like a wormhole to go into another dimension or a higher consciousness when you sit under the pyramid. But we'll talk about that at another time. But this architecture was from heaven. It was divinely inspired. It seems like nowadays the only purpose for architecture is either that it's going to be cool, right, neat looking, or see who can get the highest one, right, pride. Oh, my tower's higher than your tower, so, yours is higher, so I'll put a pole, a flagpole on mine. Now mine's higher because my flag's higher than yours. Or most of these buildings are banks, which serves their purpose. We store our money in the bank. We can't buy or sell unless we get the mark of the beast, And they're building these buildings to more or less rule it over us, right? Monopolize a civilization, keeping us under control. They have us in armies. They have us in schools. They're constantly teaching us propaganda. And the buildings that we have in modern times are like banks or churches or hospitals, which are designed to control and manipulate us. But in those days, it seems like these things were civilizations that brought the people together, that were used to initiate individuals into the mysteries. You'd have to believe then that these great pyramids were designed either to, in stone, house some great truth that one day, I guess, will be revealed. So they had to put it in stone so it would be preserved. And they wrote like some mystery scribbles all over the walls, and prophetically saying, okay, one day you'll understand these scribbles. I go away, I shall return again, and I hope I find faith on earth, Hopefully you guys will just wake up, right? And I put it all in this great big memorial stone for you to help you remember. And when you do finally remember, you'll start realizing that, the shape is important for our health, and civilization is about knowledge that needs to be revealed, and there's somebody trying to stop it from being revealed. So this is why we wrote it in stone, to be preserved. So it seems like these great pyramids were there for a reason, to hold the great knowledge. And when the bad guys came in to murder and to war and to plunder, they had to bring it underground. And it seems like they had an idea. One we can see easy enough, we already know about, and that is that the language was important to teach us the truth. the science. Remember how Yahweh didn't want the science or the language. So he came down and saw what they were doing. They were building this tower. What does that mean? Well, they were probably putting the symbols in the rock, in the cuneiform, right there in Babylon. They had observatories. They were looking at the stars. They were contemplating science to advance their mind. They were talking about better government, giving people libraries, teaching people, initiating them into the mysteries. Now, even if somebody tried to stop people from finding the truth, I mean, you could say that Jesus didn't give this every bit of information to everybody. They had to be sincere, and they had to come and ask. There were a lot of people that were stumbled when Jesus said certain things, and they went away. But those who went to Jesus said, humbly, and said, Lord, teach me what you mean. He would privately explain to them. Because the parables, see, you needed either the Holy Spirit and sincerity to understand, or you needed a teacher, someone to open your eyes for you, to help you and guide you. And these were what these teachers would do. And they would be initiated into the mysteries. Now, you have to realize then, at least, if they were hiding it, it was from somebody bad, like the armies, right? From wicked governments, right? I think that's why Jesus walked away 2,000 years ago and said, look, you can have your kingdom. Because he knew that the Christ child within all of us would be born one day. Mankind would one day wake up. We would all finally get there in the latter days. And a time of judgment would come. But in the meantime, he went away, apparently knowing that we weren't going to be able to get it yet. So he said, John, write this down in symbols and signs, and in the latter days they'll understand. Because I want you guys to understand, and I'm patient with you, and one day you will. Now, I've written it in the stars, and I've written it on the cuneiform, and I've written it in parchment, and I've told the apostles, and they've spread it all over the world and went looking for the lost sheep. Okay? And I'm going to give everybody some talents, and I'm going to go away, and I'll come again. And then I'll see how you guys did. Whether or not you helped and fed the sheep and clothed them and took care of everybody, gave them a cup of water. You won't lose your reward if you do that. I'm going away, I'll come again. So, Jesus wasn't upset with the knowledge that was in those temples. It was important knowledge. He initiated his disciples and his apostles into that knowledge. But he didn't share that knowledge with people that were not worthy, because they would rend them, your pearl that you gave them, beneath their feet, like a swine. Don't give that which is holy unto dogs, the scripture says. So he understood that it was pointless to try and teach people who didn't want to know the truth and were not interested in shepherding the sheep or loving one another. They were a group of individuals that traversed land and sea to make one proselyte, but then made them twofold for the fires of hell to come, Jesus said. So, he wasn't happy with that. But the best thing he could do is preserve the truth in symbols and in a book, and in the pyramids, and in underground. He would, by his divine providence, he would allow these things to come up out of the ground. 1945, Dead Sea Scrolls, Nag Hammadi Library, the cuneiform, the Babylonian tablets, Sumerian tablets, the Akkadian tablets, many, the Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Rosetta Stone, all of this stuff. And now the Mayan information and the stuff that's coming to light about the Mayans and the Aztecs, because they had a lot of what we're about to talk about here as well underground there. But we go down there, and now it's happening. Some of these tunnels have been opened and they're going down. And I'm sure these tunnels are vast and we haven't even scratched the surface. But remember what I said is that there was a library, there was ancient knowledge down under the ground, under the pyramids. Well, you know what I think? We talked about this in other videos a while back and several times. But remember how Moses had two tablets one was a tablet of stone. The first law that Moses got when he went to Mount Horeb, which represents the ore, or light, ore is also the symbol for gold, which, is the symbol for light. But the orb with a B is an orb like the sun. And Horeb is the mountain of light, or the sun. And the other mountain that he went up was Sinai, which is the letter Shin, which has to do with the moon, the lesser light. And on that mountain, he got these 2 tablets of clay stone. The Apostle Paul says they represented your stony heart. So the first commandments that he received, that the people would not accept, that he eventually broke as a symbol of the fact that they couldn't keep it, were the commandments of love. See, because our Father in heaven shone down in his brightness, and they saw the true I am. But they couldn't look upon him. They couldn't understand love. They couldn't look upon it. They couldn't comprehend love, and they couldn't do it. They were angry inside. They had vengeance within them, and their carnal self was too mad, and they were complaining and lusting after the meat pots of Egypt. And none of them ever went into the promised land. So he had to offer them his love, but they rejected it. So then instead, because they wouldn't receive the love of the truth that they might be saved, they got the strong delusion. And that was that angel that he said, I'm going to send mine angel, but he will not pardon your sins. You guys are stiff-necked people, and you wouldn't receive me, but him you will receive. And but me you'll reject, Jesus said. So I think then there's something interesting happening here. Moses talks about the original law that was written by our Father in heaven's own finger. Now, our Father doesn't have a finger. Okay? But that was the one that when Moses saw him, he said he was so bright that he wanted to see this deity, but our Father in heaven says, I'm too bright. You can't see me and yet live. Jesus said, no man has seen my Father, ever. You've never seen his form or heard his voice. So the 10 words are the voice of Yahweh. And all the people, they heard that. That was the voice of Yahweh. Jesus said, that's not my God. That's not my Father. You've never heard my Father or seen his voice. The other deity, Moses tried to see him, and he said, you can't see me and live. And that's the deity that came and told Moses to give the people his laws of love. But the people rejected that. So if the second covenant was written by Moses' hand and was spoken by Yahweh and written by only Moses' hand, not by God's own finger, then Moses wrote the second one on tablets of clay, which represented your stony heart, which represented the law of this world, the carnal commandments. So what did our Father in heaven then write, or what was written, or what was there on that other law? Well, we know what it is. Jesus went up the Mount of Olives and came down with the law of his Father, which is love. Love one another. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Forgive, and ye shall be forgiven. Not an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but give and ye shall receive. So, the law of love was written then on our hearts with spirit. Well, what is spirit? Spirit is energy. And what is that? Light. Truth. I suspect that if you're going to preserve all the ancient wisdom, I would suspect that our Father in heaven is at least far smarter than any human ever was, for sure, right? And if we can write books and type, we got typewriters, and now we've supposedly invented computers where we can put all this information down on a little computer chip. Don't you suppose our Father in heaven could do that as well? And if these great pyramids are some miraculous thing, and there's so much that we just don't know, and it's unexplained mysteries, and one day we're going to find out. Well, what do you suppose we're going to find out? We're going to not only find out that underneath the pyramids, these chambers lead to great treasures and wealth that the world can't even imagine, that they've stolen from us, and that the Lord's preserving down there for us one day. But also the knowledge about who we are. That's what the restoration is. to bring the hearts of fathers back towards their sons. In other words, our ancestors. We got to know who and what we are, what our forefathers did. Because we've lost the link to who we are. So the restoration work is going to restore the tribes of Israel and who they are, their identity. And the way to do that is from the apostle, Joseph Smith, the prophet Joseph Smith said that in this generation, Israel will be regathered. And the way that she'll be regathered, aside from the fact that people will physically fellowship with one another around the world, but they won't necessarily have to come somewhere. Because there are other verses that talk about the peoples going back to their own lands, and there might be certain, each of the regions of the world might be a particular lot or an area for each of the tribes to have their own home. So this temple will be worldwide. If you look at the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, the dimensions of it is huge. It's about the size of the moon. See, it's going to basically come down and overshadow the earth. And it has 12 gates. And it's not talking about some physical temple. It's talking about the new government and the new structure or house that our spirits are going to dwell in. An immortal body with white robes and a new governmental structure and 144,000 rulers that are going to take the place of the present evil, wicked government. The kingdom of our Father in heaven is going to be transferred to us shortly. And when that happens, there's going to be an unveiling of ancient truths that's going to be coming up out of the ground. And I wouldn't be surprised if all of the ancient wisdom for thousands of years is recorded in a device. I'm sure they had, today we have these huge factories to, we're turning coal into some sort of energy, and it's very dirty and filthy, and you got to have these big factories, and it's basically an ancient, archaic way of doing things. But there are things that have never come up into the mind of man. We haven't even... The bad people in the universe that want to keep us slaves have been hiding some things from us. That once those things are revealed and we use them for good, there will not ever be any more evil on this earth. Once we find out that the electricity is free, that knowledge is something that everybody's allowed to have, and we are really like the divine being made in his image, and he cannot harm us anymore, and we've got all of the resources are given back to human beings, then we will soar like with eagle's wings, like the scripture says. But recently, down there in Peru, now remember, this is just not far from the big lines at Nazca, Peru, which proves that, because you can't see these lines and figurines and shapes and animal figurines all around on the mountains and in the valleys there. You can't see them unless you get up in the sky with an airplane. Now, if they had airplanes, they might have had a reason to make these shapes and lines on the ground. But even then, what would be their purpose? Unless it was like advertising. The animal shapes were probably having something to do with astrological signs and symbols in the sky. It may be, since it's such a vast area, you see all these, looks like runways. If you really get to looking at some of these pictures, they look like huge starships would land. And when these starships would come into the atmosphere, they would need to find out, okay, where are we landing? Well, I'm sure they have GPS, but in the end, when you're going to land the last few thousand feet, you need to kind of know where you're going to put it down, right? Visually. And so that would be an awesome way, as these people come into the atmosphere, if they could identify some lines, like airports today, they have these lights and a lighthouse, and it's flashing, and it sort of beckons the airplane, and the lights on the runway so they can land at night, right? Or else they wouldn't be able to land. They have to be able to see. Now, we did this with ships. We used lighthouses to guide the ships into the harbor. Well, this is what they did. It's actually talked about in the Sumerian tablets. And they used the Great Pyramid. It had a light on top as a beacon for these ships that would come and land on Earth. And this is why they had these huge hundreds of tons of solid rock chiseled out of the quarries as a platform for these ships to land on. We don't have no idea what kind of ships they were landing. But it says that they would come into the atmosphere and see Mount Ararat and line it up with the Great Pyramid, and then that's how they would land there. Well, obviously they did the same thing in the area down there in Peru. This must have been one of the greater parts or civilized areas of the world. That and Egypt and perhaps places in India and other places around the world. I suspect there was a very important place along the Mississippi. And we'll talk about that again too one of these days. But there definitely was a vast civilization there. And there are still pyramids, one of which is bigger than the one in Egypt, just south of St. Louis in the United States. And I have personally seen in California, in the Rocky Mountains, way up, not too far from Lassen. It's where my uncle lives, and I spent a lot of years walking and hiking the hills in there. There is a few more or less like gorges or rivers and creeks that come down off of Mount Lassen and make their way to the Sacramento Valley. And one of them is called Deer Creek, one of them is called Mill Creek, and one of them is called Rock Creek. And those are pretty big canyons. They're beautiful, beautiful canyons. And there's lots of caves in there where you can just literally find thousands of arrowheads. The natives in that area were vast before the white man came. And I recently read a story where the military, I mean, I was like, I'm reading along and it just says, oh yeah, the military wiped out all the natives in California. I'm like, what? When did they ever tell me that in school? I mean, you know what I mean? They don't just come out and say it like that. They usually say, oh, there were some skirmishes and Indian wars. But no, it wasn't any Indian wars. The military literally went in and, in many cases, just exterminated the natives. The last of the natives that were there in this area that I'm talking about was a man that they later identified as Ishi, which wasn't really his name. It's just that they sent a linguistic in to try and communicate with him. And the only thing they could, when they kept asking, like, what is your name, and going through different languages, the man seemed to respond to some Hebrew. And so then they were able to get him to say he was Ishi, which means I am man. And I guess in his belief system, they didn't just really tell you their name. It was kind of something that they, not sure exactly what that was all about, but they didn't say, okay, I'm Bob or whatever. But it is up Rock Creek as you're going up towards Mount Lassen, which is a pretty tall mountain. It's volcanic and it's active. But I found, well, it's all lava up there, by the way. About 6 inches down, there's some soil, but then it's lava and you can't break through. But sticking up out of the lava on this particular, I don't know whether to call it a cliff, as it overlooks this great big sort of canyon. There is these straight, square, hewn rocks that must be several tons each rock. They are absolutely square, just like you would see on these great pyramids. There's no question in my mind that they were chiseled out in the same fashion that the ones down there in Peru were chiseled out. But all you can see there in the mountains up by Lassen is about 6-7 feet of these rocks sticking up out of the lava. And what you see is almost like what I would probably say would be like the tower at the top, or something like a castle pinnacle or something, because I found, maybe I would say 100 yards away from that area, I saw a wall where lots of more or less bricks, smaller bricks or rocks, were stacked in a straight line to make a wall. I followed the wall, and it made a perfect square. I couldn't follow it all the way around, only on the, I'd say, it's kind of the west side of this outcropping. I saw the wall. I assumed it went all the way around in a square. But in the middle, what I had pictured to be the middle of the square that I only saw one side of, there was this place that I was telling you about originally, where the rocks are hewn and they're huge, and they kind of make a square area, which to me kind of looked like an altar. So I'm convinced in my mind. I shouldn't say convinced, but I'm fairly convinced. I really would like to go back one day and get pictures of that, although I don't know if I'll ever get back there. But I've often thought, if there was some way a person could go up there with some sort of tool and bust through the lava, which I don't know how deep the lava is or anything like that, but if a person, I don't know if you need a jackhammer or what you do to get down through that lava, and then, and I don't know how far it goes, but after you get through the lava, I would think that there would be some amazing finds. Because if that's a temple, then everything in that temple was completely preserved the way it was when the lava came down and left it intact. I suspect that there are people perfectly preserved underneath the ground there, as well as all of their books and their writings and their jewels and all the things that and I've often thought maybe some of these caves, that if you go down over the canyon wall, because that's up on the top, if you go down over the canyon wall, I found caves, but I never did explore all of the caves. I've always wondered if some of the caves don't go back towards the center of that mountain and connect to a tunnel or a corridor that goes underneath that great temple that I found. But I say that because I believe that these vast temples are all over the world. But take a look at that temple that you see on the screen there. It's called the Temple of the Crystal Skull. You might have saw the Raiders of the Lost Ark series with Harrison Ford, where they went down there and found in Peru and found these crystal skulls. Well, there's been a lot of talk about these skulls. If you go on Google and you look up these crystal skulls that they found down there in these temples in Peru, they'll tell you, a lot of them will tell you, that they have now determined they're all fake. But then you do a little more research. Remember that Dougherty guy that's saying that they found out all the Dead Sea Scrolls are fake, and that's not true. It's just a couple of fragments that they found out was fake. Not the original find, that there were some people that were trying to pass off a few fragments as forged it to make some money. Okay, that happens. The Dead Sea Scrolls are not fake. And neither are these crystal skulls, the original ones that they have found down there. They found them in several places. A couple of dozens of them in different places. They found some in the Aztec area down in Mexico, and they found some down in Peru as well. But on the sites where you'll go to see where they claim they're fake, the only proof that they have that any of them are fake is that they're too perfect. They say they've studied them and they're so perfectly created that they couldn't have made it in ancient times, pre-Columbian, because they didn't have the technology. So it couldn't be. So it had to be modern. That's the only proof that they have that they're not real. But there are a lot of scientists not falling for this, because what they're saying is that they're actually so perfect that we don't have tools today that could have done it. And the people that supposedly did this, if they were trying to pull a fast one, if this was fraudulent, they would have had to have been several different people from different times that all tried to forge the same particular hoax at different points in time. And they all seem to be used the same crystal concept skull, right? Over maybe a couple hundred years. They've been digging these things up all the way from Mexico to Peru. in various locations. And they're all crystal or marble or some form of crystal quartz or precious stone. And most of them are all so perfectly cut in such precision that many people say it's far more unlikely that any dealer or thief or whatever it is trying to make money off of a rock or something could forge something like that in modern times at different times, different people doing that. It's far more likely that these stones are perfectly cut and carved and polished with precision tools that we don't even know what kind of tool they may have used in some ancient time when they may have had this ability that we don't have today. So there's certainly no proof that all these crystal skulls are finding are fake. So what do you suppose they might have used these skulls for? Well, watch the movie with Harrison Ford, The Crystal Skulls or whatever it was called. But there is a very good possibility, a theory, that says they're computer chips. And so perhaps it's something like the original stone that Moses received from our Father in heaven. Maybe instead of a tablet of stone, perhaps it was a crystal stone that he put the laws and the history of mankind and his love. And somehow or another, these little crystals refract the light. The information coming in is stored in the crystal. The knowledge gets housed and stored in this little chip. It's a crystal chip. And so imagine a computer that uses a computer chip that is as big as a human skull and is fashioned from one huge, giant quartz crystal or diamond or some sort of precious stone. Just one piece, perfectly cut and fashioned as if a jeweler did it, but this whole thing is one piece that would be able to hold or store vast amounts of knowledge. You could store all of the history of mankind for millions of years in just one crystal skull. And I think that's the reason these skulls are down under the ground in these tunnels. So I'm going to go ahead and go, guys, but I'm going to put a little clip where you will watch as they go down. I can't put the whole video on here to show you that, but I'll just give you the basic clip that shows that they did discover these crystals. Under the temple in Peru, the Cusco temple, as they go down under that temple, you'll see how far they go down and how vast these corridors are. But wait till you see what they found down there. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and go, guys. Hope you guys have a wonderful day. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.